All right, so I'm just gonna get started. Um, there's some facts that we have to get onto the table first, and the biggest fact is that crime has been dropping since like the 90s. And before I do anything, I have to prove that to you. So, if you look here, you can see violent crime here on the right, property crime, murder, and it's been on a steady decline since the 90s, and this graph only goes up to 2005. However, this graph goes all the way out to 2019. And from 93 until from 93 until 2020, 21, it looks like right here. No, sorry, 2019. Property crime, violent victimizations, homicides, it all has this steady decline. And the problem with this is that people are arguing about what the cause or the correlative facts of the matter are. And the truth of the matter is, if you're conservative, an increasing use of incarceration, the growth in the number of police, improved policing strategies, harsher sentencing, stuff like that is usually the route that you're going to take in order to explain the lowering of the crime rate. But that doesn't really make any fucking sense, because when you take into the fact that 25% of the world's population of prisoners is America, right? We make up that, but we only make up 5% of the world's population. Then when you start to consider the fact that I think it's something along the lines of like within 5 years of being paroled, 50% of prisoners will be back in jail within a year, and then it shoots up to like 81%. And then when you start to factor in our recidivism rate, and the conservative estimate, like the nice estimate, is somewhere around 60%, but most of the time it's 80%, right? That the total recidivism rate. So that tells you that the punishment isn't fucking working. That tells you that they're just gonna do the crime, they don't give a fuck about the time, and then they just live in prison. And when you ask them, like later on in life, like what the fuck is going on, most of them will say something along the lines that they wish they had someone to help them realize their own worth and agency when they were younger, right? But I'll come back to that in a little bit. But when you are progressive leaning, you're gonna apply this, because we're talking about from 93 till 2020, well, 22 now. You Progressives like to bring up the economy and how great the economy was in the 90s, but that argument kind of goes out the window in 2000s because of the fucking recession. Um, social welfare, like products, like programs and stuff like that. Everything that I've said so far dampens crime for sure. It lowers it to some degree, but not this giant spike that we saw from 93 till now. And there's a rather extreme, or I guess the word is provocative, idea, and that the reason that the crime has been reduced was the legalization of Roe v. Wade, of legalized abortions, right, as a constitutional right. And that happened in 73. So all that that cohort of children that would have been born at that time, by the time they would have become criminals, would have been 20 years later. So abortion reduced the population somewhere between 5 and 10%. So like logically we can determine that less people, less crime. That's pretty simple math. However, that doesn't accurately describe the amount of the drop that was in this crime reduction, and that's continued to be in this crime reduction. So the question becomes, why? So what essentially what's like the largest predictors of crime? And colloquially, or like in general parlance, like when you're talking to some random dude on the street, most of the time what you hear is single parents And it's usually specifically fatherlessness, right? You hear that all the time. Fatherlessness leads to criminality. But there's been a lot of studies that have determined that that's not necessarily the truth. It's that you have a single parent household and they don't have dual income, so a single parent household is more likely to live in poverty. And then when you're in poverty, everybody else around you is in poverty. And then it's the peer socialization that the child would go through. And just to expound on that specific thing, when you have prisoners who turning around and committing the same crime later after they just spent 10 years in prison, the peer socialization of prisoners is a huge impact on like whether or not they're going to commit the crime again, because you are the sum value of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So like, what is this prisoner going to do? Is he going to just ask the prisoner next to him like, what do you do to better yourself, bro? Like, no, that's not that doesn't fucking happen. So another predictor of crime is child maltreatment. So like if you're abused or whatever, low parent-child attachment, marital discord, family discord. So like if your parents are fucking fighting all the time or they get divorced, like some type of attachment thing like that. Alcoholism and drug use is a big one. And low parental supervision and monitoring. And then family size and birth order. Birth order is an interesting one, but you know, a little anecdotal story is I went to high school with these 3 brothers, and the 2 oldest brothers, from the time that I ever knew these dudes, were in and out of prison. Like one of them, when we were like 15, did like a home invasion and then killed the dog, and then ended up in Adobe or some shit like that. So they're both in prison, like currently, and the youngest one is doing great. Like he's doing very well for himself. And I saw him one day on Facebook attribute that to his father. And that really got me thinking, because I've seen his father interact before, and his dad is the type of dude that's like, do what I say because I said so, and if you don't, I'm gonna beat you, right? That's the kind of vibe I got from him. So it wasn't dad that taught him, right? It was watching his brothers fuck up over and over and over again and not meeting like the goal that they had for themselves, basically. So he learned through that, and that's kind of where the birth order thing comes from. So children whose parents didn't really want children are more likely to commit crimes. You know, such children are less likely to succeed in school and are more likely to live in poverty. They tend to have lower mother-child relationship quality. Some people say that people commit a crime only if the cost of committing it are lower than the benefits that they'd gain. I don't know if I necessarily believe that. Maybe on like a philosophical level. So growing up in an environment of harsh poverty with the feeling that opportunities for success are closed to you because of discrimination can lead to like helplessness and rage that find expression in violence. So the question here for me, right, is I try to remove as many variables as possible. And I hear a lot of like attribution to like evil. And as a combat veteran, like I've been to Afghanistan, I've been to Iraq, and I hear a lot of people talk about these people as they were evil. But when I pose the question of like, if you took a baby from that society, like the moment it was born, gave it to a mother here, raised it as your own, would it have the same problems? Like, would it have the same beliefs? And the answer is no, right? So it's about peer socialization, and it's about the structure in which you grow up in, the cultural, parental, however you want to look at it. So all of these things give you a larger likelihood to, they're predictors of crime. So the proportionality, or like the possibility of you becoming a criminal is extremely high, right? So the question then is who are these mothers who would be potentially getting abortions? So teenagers, unmarried women, and the economically disadvantaged are all substantially more likely to seek abortions. Like, you don't go to get an abortion because you're doing well in life, right? That doesn't happen. Like that doesn't happen, all right? This would mean that abortion is more frequent among those parents who are least willing or able to provide a nurturing home environment. So these women wouldn't be capable of doing this. And then evidence strongly suggests that abortion is used by women to avoid bearing children who would grow up in adverse conditions. So all of that sounds, you know what I mean, whatever. But like, what does all of this really mean? So what would an adverse condition be? And for me in my life, I grew up as a drug addict, right? I did meth from the time I was 13 until I was like 18. And it took years for me to get sober. And it was a choice that I had to make, and nobody could put a constraint on the outside of me to make me better. I had to choose it for me. And I went to rehab, I went to therapy more times than I can count, and it didn't work because I didn't give a fuck. Um, so let's say you have a 15-year-old girl who's a drug addict and she finds out she's pregnant. Is she gonna just stop doing drugs? No. So if she doesn't stop doing drugs and all the way through her pregnancy she does drugs, how does that baby turn out? Right? I just recently met a girl who is 4 months pregnant, and she does 15 fentanyl pills a day, and she takes methadone. Um, and she's 20 years old. She has two other kids. The dad is also doing fentanyl. And yeah, like, what is the reasonable expectation that we have of the outcome of that, any one of those three children's lives? Any one of the three, right? Put yourself into that kid's life and imagine what it would be like to live in that environment, because not everybody grew up like that. So when you're in that type of an environment, you don't see everything on the outside, right? It's real easy for certain conservative people to say, well, it's just, you know what the difference between right and wrong is. Well, who taught you what the fucking difference was? It was your parents. Like, you emulate what the fuck they do. And if they're just doing drugs and being criminals in and out of jail, this, that, and the other, like, what the fuck do you think you're gonna do? So then you have another example of, let's say, abortion is restricted in this person's state, right? So she has to have the baby. There's nothing she can do. She can't leave, this, that, and the other. So when that baby comes, she's going to resent the baby for stopping her from doing things in her own life. So what kind of an environment does that produce in the child, right? And something that's pretty close to home here is, if you've watched that new show Moon Knight, when the one son and his brother go, and the older one gets him killed, essentially, accidentally. The mom begins to blame the one that's alive for the death of the younger one. And that trauma throughout his entire childhood essentially broke his fucking consciousness and split him in half. And then he became, he had DID, but on like a small, like, not to that extreme, but just imagine if the entire time you're growing up, your mom just treats you like shit. Just treats you like shit. Like, what's the reasonable expectation for you to believe that you're a good person or feel like you're good, right? And when you're looking at these criminals and what they are now versus where they were, these are all the same boxes that you're checking, right? My mom was this, my parents were this, drug addicts, this was in my life the entire time. So you have these statistics that basically say that the pregnancies that were terminated during abortion, right, during this Roe v. Wade time period, were 70% more likely to be born into single-parent homes, 40% more likely to live in poverty, and 50% more likely to receive welfare. And they're also 35% more likely to die in the first year. The effect of being born into a poor single household will be quite different than those who are born into a poor single household because abortion is restricted. So essentially there's a thing called a birth cohort, which is a study that follows a group of people that were born at a similar date or period of time, be it a day, month, year, decade, for instance. It follows these people throughout their lives and collects information for them at particular ages. You could say the high school class, the graduating class of 2007, right? Something like that. And that's a birth cohort. And then you follow their lives all the way through. Well, when you look at your own life all the way through, like, who became criminals, right? Who was doing the drugs? Like, what was going on in their life? Like, why did this happen? And then how did they change? And normally change only comes when there's some external influence that provides some type of positive effect on them, but you can't really determine what it is. For me, it was, my wife and her family that helped me a lot. Um, but that doesn't happen for everybody. And I can't reasonably expect that to happen or be the catalyst in which changes everybody. And then if you're one of those people that's like, well, I'm good, and this, that, and the other, I would argue whether or not you're good, because most of you motherfuckers need therapy. Um, because there's another effect here when you're talking about parenting styles of like this criminality and versus authoritative versus authoritarian. Like if you're the type of dude like that we hate in the army, right? That do as I say, not as I do type of person to your kid, what do you expect your kid to do? You're just teaching him that there's a power structure and that he's on the bottom, right? That's not helping him learn who he is and why he's having these problems. And the common thread that I've seen through most men is that we don't understand what our emotions are. We know anger, and that's fucking it, right? You made me mad. I'm mad because of what you did, right? No, you stupid bitch. It's because of something within you. You feel some type of way about it, right? Nobody can give you an emotion. Them shits were in you the entire time. But who teaches you that, right? And that's your parents. And the way that you get taught that is by feeling your fucking feelings. So anyway, that was a little bit of a tangent. But the point is that the women who are going to get abortions are the most those babies would be the highest risk for these predictors or these things that would cause criminality later on in life. So when we legalized abortion, crime rate fucking dropped 20 years later, when all of these kids would have grown up to be criminals. And then there's another effect where the children that were born after the legalization had better quality of life, right? They didn't have to split the capital of the parents, right? The attention and this, that, and the other. And they're also less likely to be in single parent households, and they're less likely to live in poverty. So with this overturning of Roe v. Wade, a lot of states are talking about a full-on ban of abortion. And if we do that, and I'm not here to say whether or not it's right or wrong or make a moral argument yet, but if we do that, and if that's the choice that we decide to make as a state, 20 years from now, crime will be going up and prisons will be packed, and the police issue that we have right now will be even worse. So what we have right now is 50% of jails, 50 to 60, depending on where you get the statistic, is filled with mental health patients. Not even necessarily criminals, or they did some criminal behavior because of their need for medication. So there was a point in time in America where we had state-run mental health facilities, right? The whatever the fuck you want to call them, the asylums. They were doing like experiments on people, and they determined that the behavior within these things was unconstitutional, basically. So now that entire thing is now privatized. But at one point they were doing something called the Greyhound treatment, where they would load these motherfuckers up on buses and ship them to the next state, because they said that at some point their brain might reset in a new spot, when really they were just trying to fucking alleviate the load that these people were placing on their economy. So places like Phoenix and places where the weather is decent all year round, we have a very large homeless population because of practices like that. We also have in this country, like New Jersey, for instance, at one point, I think it was like 2013, they had more people incarcerated for failure to pay fines than actually committing crimes. So the elimination of like imprisonment or like debtors' prisons was like in 1833, and then in 1983 the Supreme Court determined it was unconstitutional. but I think something like 43 states still imprison people for failure to pay fines because of some conservative idea of that make them pay for their own fucking prison, right? Make them pay for their own whatever. So you can do 10 years in prison, and then you have, okay, so let's say this. So you go to prison, and these Fortune 500 companies like Walmart, Swift, a few others, have like work programs inside of the prison. So you can work off some of your time and you also get paid. But they only pay you, I think in Arizona, the minimum wage for a prisoner is like $3. And no, sorry. I think it's $15 a day, and the prison gets nine of it, something like that. It's some weird thing like that. Anyway, so you get $4 or $5 a day, maybe, and you add that up over a 10-year period. But you have to buy everything in the prison, right? You're having to buy your own clothes, the uniform that you have to wear. You have to buy the food. You have to buy your fucking your hygiene shit. So by the time you get out, you can't even save money. So you can do a 10-year sentence and then owe the prison $60,000 for housing you. That's not to mention the court fees or whatever. So if our economy is built on this idea of needing a slave class, where like capitalism is, if that's what it is, I'm fine with that, but let's just be honest about it. And then the question then will become is who are we making do that? Because there is the truth of the matter that some people are too far gone because so much shit has been happening to them so consistently, where after you've been indoctrinated or institutionalized after however many years, there may not be anything that we can do because of the way the system has been, and it's fucked. So the question then becomes is who are we putting in prison and why? And then why are they going to prison? And why is it that they can't follow our, quote unquote rules, this external structure that we're placing on them? What's the problem? And the problem always goes back to childhood. It always goes back to childhood. And if we're banning abortions, we're essentially telling this unborn generation of kids, I don't give a fuck if your life is going to be suffering and your entire deck is stacked against you. You can figure it out. And it feels like, because I'm watching people on Facebook post, like I've never seen, it's funny to me watching so many people cry about not being able to kill babies. But for me personally, and for a lot of people that I know, that's never what it's been about, right? This is just one aspect of the argument. The other aspect of the argument is whether or not we should be allowed to tell women what the fuck to do, or whether it's their choice. And to some degree, all monotheistic, patriarchal religions have this thing that's baked inside them about control of women and children, for that matter. And if you're in a lot of what I'm talking about is really so that I can give you guys some ammo that I'm watching out here argue with people on Facebook that are making really dumbass arguments. So you can give them some facts. So in the Bible, hold on, I think so Numbers chapter 5, it says that if you even think that your woman has cheated on you, you can kill that baby. Right? So God is agreeing with abortion right there. Deuteronomy, it talks about if your child is disobedient, you can kill that motherfucker. You can actually take him out to the city and everybody stones him to death. And then there's a couple other ones. I don't remember where they are exactly, but you could Google it real quick. It's something to the effect of when a woman is on her period, she's not fit to serve you food. When a woman's on her period, she's not fit to lay in the same bed as you. When a woman is raped, you can sell her, or the rapist must buy her for like 50 shekels. Like shekels, bro? Really? Come on. So the Bible argument for me never fucking comes off the ground because it's pretty stupid. But the question about whether or not the killing of kids is wrong, right? I'm a combat veteran, and so are most of the people that I talk to. And if you have a problem with killing kids, like what did you do in Afghanistan, right? Like we understand that sometimes people have to die, and it's not what we want, right? It's just the cards that were dealt to us. Or the decisions that somebody else made, right? If they're going to kill me, I'd rather be you than me. And then, I mean, the argument there falls apart because they were trying to kill me. However, um, knowing all of the evidence about why these kids are their lives are going to be shit, or they're going to be in like some of the worst conditions because of the choices of the mother, we're still essentially incarcerating them to live that life. Like, we're imprisoning them into that life structure. So then you can say some stupid shit about the foster system, but the foster system, you go into the foster system, you live there for 18 years of your life, you have no family, you have no connection with any other human being, which is like one of the most important things in life. And then when you turn 18, they kick you on the street. And at least in Arizona, there's no programs to help that 18-year-old until he becomes a felon or a drug addict. And to me, that's the most fucked up shit I've ever heard. So essentially, we're saying that, well, you're alive, yeah, and we're gonna take care of you. You don't really have parents, so the state's your parents. And then when you get old, who the fuck do you turn to? Because I know as a grown ass man, when I was 18, if I didn't have the army, I would have fallen straight on my fucking face. And then when I got out of the army, I fell straight on my fucking face. And then my mom was there to help me. My family was there to help me. And I know that that's true for most people, right? But then you have this single mother who's pregnant, who then doesn't have any family, doesn't have any money, so she has to go work. And then where does she put the kids? Well, with a bunch of other kids. And then nobody's watching these kids except for one babysitter. And that situation never really works out very well. And if it does, good for you. We're just talking probabilities at this point. So then a lot of this argument from the moral landscape, you could call it, is about the fact that they don't ever get a chance to live. So, but if they don't ever get a chance to live, they don't ever get a chance to suffer. And that's the way that I square that in my mind. But that argument only works for me because I have different metaphysical understandings of how the world works. But when you're talking to a Christian specifically, the way that I always ask the question is, so did the baby do anything wrong? Like the infant, the fetus, whatever. Did it do anything wrong? Did it commit any sins? Is it bad? Is it evil? Whatever. They're like, no, 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 no. So then when it dies, it goes to heaven, right? It goes straight to heaven. It passes go, collects $200 and goes straight to heaven, right? And they don't like that argument. I mean, I understand why. But I don't like the argument that you only get one life to live. Because after learning all this stuff that I know now from going to therapy and like my childhood, it's almost mechanistic the way that these things happen, and until you wake up to it, you don't know a lot of the times what you're doing. I can't tell you how many times that when I was younger, people would ask me, do you just want attention? Then why do you keep getting in trouble? And in my head, I was like, I don't want to do this. Like, I don't want to do bad shit. I don't want to do bad shit. I want to do the right thing. I'm always trying to do the right thing. It just somehow I always make the choice to do bad shit. And then the first time you go to therapy, they tell you something along the lines of, you're just looking for attention because of you never got any positive attention, so you're looking for negative attention. But that's not necessarily true either, because I was getting positive attention from the family members that were raising me, but I wasn't getting attention from the people that I wanted it from, right? My mom and my dad. And like once you get past the age of 25, your prefrontal cortex is like supposedly fully developed, which controls social interactions and stuff. So a lot of this stuff you're not going to understand until you're 25. So you just suffer the entirety of your life, and then potentially in that time, like if I hadn't joined the army, like some of you who've been to high school with me, we know kids that have been in prison since high school or went to prison in high school. So I joined the army, like I joined active duty, and one of the dudes that I used to run with, he went to prison. I did 10 years active, he did 10 years in the pen. And then around the time I got out, he got out a little while after. He was out for a couple of months and then went straight back to drugs and fell right back in the same hole, and then now he's back in prison. And I can't even begin to imagine the prison within his own head that he feels more comfortable in prison. Because there's the same, the same adage when like you've grown up in a like a traumatic childhood, like a horrible, not a horrible, but like a dysfunctional relationship. All of your relationships after that look like that, and the dysfunction feels familiar, so you're more comfortable. And I can't always tell sometimes if it's, stuff from the army or from my childhood. When everything is going right, I feel as if something is coming, to something is going to happen. And then I start fucking shit up before it can fuck it up, so that I'm ready and I knew it was coming. Um, so when you learn all of that, you begin to see your friends, you begin to see the life as like a mechanism in the beginning, at least. And I've had a lot of friends that have killed themselves or died, and they did some bad shit, right? Reasonably, like that's why they killed themselves, because they felt that way about themselves. So what Christianity tells me is that they only got one chance, one life to try, basically. And if you were given the wrong cards at the start, you aren't making it to heaven. And that you had nothing to do with that. You didn't consent to be here. You didn't choose your parents. You didn't choose the living situation in which you were going to be born. So why the fuck should you be punished for eternity, all on some fucking chance shit? So that's why that whole morality argument doesn't really work with me. Because if you give a fuck about the fetus, you should give a fuck about the kid. So if all of this is true about criminality, like I claim it to be, then that would mean that at least we would need to start having programs in order to deal with the backlash of what's going to come. And we can't even handle what we have now. We have a mental health crisis in Arizona across all of the jails. That's number one. Across all of the homeless population. That's number two. And across most of the veteran community as a whole in the national lens. And we can barely handle how it's going now. And we're going to try to influx more migrants from the other side, right? So Arizona right now has passed, I think it's SB 1457, and the Supreme Court just approved it. It means that persons performs an abortion knowing that the abortion is sought based on the sex or race of the child, or sex or race of the parent of the child, performs an abortion that is sought because of a genetic abnormality. If you do that, you have a class 3 felony, right? That's basically what the SB 1457 is. So what it looks like to me is that they're preemptively creating like a subclause in the law to come. They have in that SB 1457, they deleted a part of the Title 13 Criminal Code, which is 133604. A woman who solicits from any person, any medicine, drug, or substance, whatever, takes it or submits an operation. Basically, if the woman goes to try to get an abortion, she'll get 2 to 5 years. So they removed that. But what they kept was a person who provides. So the person that's giving the abortion, that still has 2 to 5 years. And that law specifically predates Arizona. It's like some common law thing. So they removed a part of it. But before Roe v. Wade was overturned, they had a law on on like the on the ready for if it wasn't overturned. So essentially, it says, except in a medical emergency, a physician may not intentionally or knowingly perform, induce, or attempt to perform or induce an abortion if the probable gestational age of the unborn human being has been determined to be greater than 15 weeks. So the law was basically going to say something to the effect of you can't have an abortion after 15 weeks, which is about 3 months. And there was, in 2020, there was 13,000 abortions, and only 650 of them were performed after 15-week gestation. So however you want to look at that is however you want to look at that. But for me, that at least gives the people the choice. And yeah, it at least would give the people the choice. But as it stands right now, our attorney general is saying that the law as it stands now, this SB 1457 and these criminal codes are in effect, and they're not going to be overturned in 90 days, which was some of the wording. So that's going to be in effect until we vote, until we tell some people what's up. So that's at least what's going on in Arizona. So, yeah, that's pretty much it.